Story 1. Mom takes down the HOA from the inside. My neighborhood does not have a homeowners association. At least, not anymore. When my parents first moved in, my older sibling, maybe 2 years old, and with me as a little glowworm, there was an HOA. They took money from the neighborhood in exchange for their services. At first, and for quite a while, my parents just kind of shrugged it off. The HOA shoveled the snow off the streets in winter and dealt with trash collection, so they were doing something worthwhile, right? Ha! No. The city controlled the snowplows and garbage trucks, not the HOA. But still, there was the illusion of effort. And besides, one summer they decided to contact a company to plant new trees all over the neighborhood. The fact that the company was owned by the son of the head of the HOA was totally coincidental. The trees were the beginning of the end for the HOA. Why? Well, my grandma on my dad's side was visiting when they came around to plant the trees. My grandma, who is a certified master gardener. And so she stared through the windows of our house as the guys planting the trees just dropped the saplings on the grass, still with their roots inside the bag they came in. No holes dug, no holes cut, just a bagged sapling lying on the grass like a pathetic and sad stick. The saplings laid there all night. No one came back to actually do their job and plant them. My master gardener stared. Grandma mentioned offhand that those saplings were going to die unless they got in the soil. And something clicked in my mom's head. She was paying the HOA money, actual money, every month, while both she and my dad worked, taking care of 2 very little kids, sending us to daycare and preschool and arranging babysitters and feeding us. And the homeowners association was just going to pull this half-assed bullshit instead of do what she's paying them for. No fucking way. So she showed up to the head of the HOA's house and basically demanded that the trees get planted properly, like she's apparently paying for them to. The head of the HOA, so excited for someone actually caring about the neighborhood, made their second mistake. They asked if Mom wanted to join the HOA. She agreed. The trees were planted, but most didn't make it. My grandma was right. First things first, my mom showed up to the next HOA meeting. There were like 5 people there. No wonder they asked Mom to join. They desperately needed the people. So Mom looked at this collection of white people, herself included, who weren't even paying money to the HOA like the rest of the neighborhood. All the contractors the HOA called in were close relatives of other HOA members and weren't paid by the HOA. After all, they're family. So my mom started digging. She spent pretty much a full summer taking down the HOA before she had to go back to teaching in the fall. With me carted along after her and my sibling old enough to be in school or daycare, she dug through the years of paperwork detailing the HOA's financial situation. And she found something extremely enlightening. The HOA didn't actually do anything. Well, they didn't do anything to benefit the community. Everything they claimed to do was either covered by the individual homeowner or by the city itself. So they were collecting money from all the neighborhood residents under false pretenses, and actually they weren't even supposed to be in our neighborhood. Their association's zone was a whole different neighborhood. So what is a working mother of 2 small children to do while her husband is off at work and she's off for the summer? She goes door to door with pamphlets. Me and my sibling in a stroller as she weaves her way through the neighborhood blocks, pamphlets explaining the situation and how to stop paying for services you'll never get. Pamphlets that are of course written in both English and Spanish to account for the high amount of Latino and Hispanic people in our neighborhood. And naturally, she got a lawyer and an accountant. It put a major dent in her pocket, but if it meant the entire neighborhood wasn't exploited for money each month, it was worth every penny. Another HOA member helped her sift through the documents and data and pass out pamphlets and encourage people to show up to the meetings, but had to back out because of work-related reasons. My mom rolled up to the courthouse flanked by the lawyer and accountant, her kids safe at home with her husband, and had more than enough evidence to get the homeowners association the fuck out of her neighborhood, expose the fraudsters for the frauds they were, and make sure that no HOA would ever push their luck in our neighborhood. It's been almost 19 years, and no one's even tried making another homeowners association in our neighborhood. TLDR, when dealing with a worse than useless homeowners association, get deep in the financials and lawyer the fuck up. Wow, what a story. So let's break this down a bit. The neighborhood used to have a homeowners association, HOA, that was supposedly doing things like snow removal and trash collection, but in reality it was all being managed by the city. The only visible attempt to contribute was planting new trees, which was badly executed and seemed pretty shady since it was done by a company owned by the HOA head's son. The real turning point here was the grandma, right? A certified master gardener, she immediately recognized the poor tree planting job. Her casual comment about the saplings dying set off this chain reaction in the mom's mind. It's kind of cool to see how one small observation can snowball into something huge. Now, what's your take on HOAs? Have you dealt with them before? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, the mom going door to door with pamphlets written in both English and Spanish is just next level dedication. And of course, getting a lawyer and an accountant to dig into the financials sounds like such a power move. Talk about taking matters into your own hands and exposing the frauds. It's interesting to see how something that started with just a few dead trees led to the whole neighborhood being freed from what was essentially a scam. And now, for nearly 2 decades, no one's even tried to start another HOA there. What do you guys think about this? Is this the kind of vigilance every neighborhood should have against useless organizations like this? Let me know your thoughts. Story 2. Cross-post from r/MC by myself. Boss's boss threatens to fire me, I accept and get himself and his friends fired. Due to many requests, cross-posted from malicious compliance. This whole story happened in 2021 and ended in October. Damn, time flies. And it is something that puts a Cheshire smile on my face. Warning, this is a very extensive story. Grab some popcorn. Background, ignore if you like. In January 2021, I began working for a very big American company in Europe that was and is in the energy sector. At the factory plant I began working at, the parts of gas turbines get assessed for restoration and reworked so they can get used again. Each single part would cost several thousand when produced new and hold for like a decade or so. Reworking cost like 1/4 of that, and the part would be good for another 8 to 10 years, with more inspections of course for safety. The customers would pay like half or 3/4 of the cost of a new part. And since we talk 2 to 8K per single part, and a gas turbine containing thousands of pieces, we speak several million for each gas turbine. Customer would save a good chunk, and of course the company was sitting on a golden goose. Over the decades that meant that the facility where the stuff was reworked had an absolute uncontested income without much of competition, since the parts were their own design and production, and a win-win for customer and company. Over time that led to the problem that competence, invention, or even honesty were not needed by the management of the facility anymore. As long as the workers stick to the already developed and tested processes and did their job, money would keep flowing in regardless what the office did or did not. You can see where this is going. Setup, somewhat important. So I was hired there as part of quality control. Specifically, I was to operate a 3D computer-managed measuring machine. Gas turbines get, as you can imagine, pretty hot and spin fast. And a decade of heat combined with dynamic stress has the nasty habit to deform stuff. Can't have that for sure. So you have to measure the stuff really precisely so that the production knows what section of which piece needs reworking, or if a piece is too out of form to be used again at all. The operation of such a machine is not too complicated. Put the piece into bracket, clamp it down, load the correct model and start the program. You get the measurement report then as a text file, and Excel as well as a PDF. The pieces, usually rotary blades, nearly always came in sets, 24 to 216 depending on the size. When all are measured, you compile all the reports the machine made into one Excel with a somewhat complicated method. Wasn't hard, I learned all that in a week. That machine was immensely important for the facility, running in 2 to 3 shifts per day, 6 days per week. Like 80% of all pieces that went through the reworking process had to be measured at least twice. As nearly anyone with a technical background can guess, operating a machine and understanding what it is actually doing are two big different shoes. When I started, there were only 3 guys that understood the machine properly, as well as a technician, Vladimir, who could actually fix codes or reprogram a 3D model if there was a problem. Vladimir, however, was the technician for the entire facility, very busy guy, and when he had to come over, his time would need to be paid by the department, something the bosses didn't encourage, so to say. Of the 3 guys who knew the machine, Antonio is important. He had been working there for a few centuries at least, knew every nook and cranny, and, while being a simple worker, if shit went wrong, he was the guy you turned to. He had a bit of a short temper and a very blunt language, but he was honest, open, and very fair. I myself am not the most social person, always held back with a brutal honesty, and I take my professional cold attitude a bit too serious, I guess. In general, if people share my principles of honesty, fairness, and taking responsibilities serious, then we get along greatly. But with people that are less trustworthy, I basically turn to an ice block. Not perfect, I know, but hey, I don't work in retail for good reason. So thing is, despite some heated arguments, Antonio and me really got along swimmingly. What no one knew was that Antonio had, over the decades, collected such a backlog of days off, overtime and whatnot, that he could retire 2 years early, and he was 63. He had decided to groom me as his successor and began teaching me every little detail about the measuring machine, how to fix stuff, how to do proper maintenance, why it did certain stuff, and so on. He was a perfectionist, but so am I, so I really appreciated it. What I noticed in my first week in the company was the biggest problem there. The facility had a massive problem with cliques, clans, and little circles. If you were part of the correct clique, you could do what you want and remain untouchable. If you aren't, well, your credit goes to anyone but you, and you are a fine scapegoat. I didn't care much about it, be honest. I am a bit of a rule fanatic and stick to them even when everyone else ignores them. For me, this was a well-paying job, with a horrible commute, 1¾ hours in one direction. So I wanted to stay there for as long as I could, earn my money, and then just take the next job. There was a 4th juice who was operating the machine. I don't remember his name, so let's call him Igor. Igor was part of the same clique as my boss, Manuel, my boss's boss, Freddie, and of course his own boss, Boris, who was also his brother. He was working the measuring machine. Simple, because it was the most comfortable job he could perform. He was usually doing the night shift, as those paid extra. He occasionally took the late shift, while I always took the early one. Was the least popular, due to start at 6 a.m., but I liked going home at 3 p.m. Igor was, well, as light bulb. He was like a wet match in a dark basement somewhere in a black hole. I might be a bit too harsh with him now, but that was all I ever got to see from him. He was also pretty lazy, rude, and arrogant. After all, he had an untouchable status due to his brother's best friend being boss of the E-Niter assessment department. The actual story, long build-up, I know. A good 6 months after I started, there was the first incident with the measuring machine. We received the material in pallets, and it was the firm rule that the rotary blades had to be sorted in numerically order. Each had a serial number and a set number. Stuff went a ton faster and easier if all was sorted clean 182, or whatever the set went up to. Occasionally an order, which were usually 2 to 4 pallets, would arrive unsorted at the measuring machine. Then we had to sort them. Since we had to lift the blades out one by one anyway to measure them, it was not that big of a deal, just a tad bit annoying. Igor never finished a set if he could help it, leaving just 1 or 2 blades left for measuring. And even when he had to finish a set and start a new one, he would never compile the reports into one Excel. I am pretty sure he didn't even know how that worked. One morning I came to work, and like so often there was just 3 blades left to measure. I shrugged without care and wanted to just finish the order and start the next. Problem was, the pallets were a complete mess, completely unsorted, despite them being measured. Igor had worked the late shift the day before, and would also work the late shift that day, so I would actually get to see him for a few minutes when I handed my shift over. This of course meant that I would have to sort all of the pallets while also operating the machine with the next order as to avoid a delay. The machine was a bit of a bottleneck in the facility. Usually this is a chill post. The blades are never heavier than 22 kilogram, 48 pound, and you had like 6 to 14 minutes between the measurement cycles to lift them out and exchange them with the last measured blade. Sorting the last order took me 2 hours of quite sweaty work while also operating the machine nearby, so I was somewhat annoyed. When Igor came in the afternoon, I asked him in a politely manner why he had not sorted that one order. He replied in quite a rude tone that he wouldn't do that. I was a bit baffled and asked if he didn't know that it was mandatory to do that. He simply replied, in a pretty rude tone again, that he wouldn't speak about that. Outright refusing to speak about a problem? What the hell? I told him that if he didn't want to speak about it, I would have to speak about it with my boss. He just smiled in a smug fashion and told me to do that. Well, I did just that. Asked my boss about it, in the fashion of, hey, I thought we were supposed to sort that stuff, or did we change that? This led to a four-way talk with my boss, Igor, as well as Boris. Boris was not happy at all, and my boss was rather embarrassed because it was all clear that I was correct, but neither of them wanted to admit that their friend had done anything wrong. I did my usual ice block impression, showing a blank face, replying in very accurate and short words, and staying all polite and professional. It came out rather inconclusive with a kind request that we should please sort the pallets if they came in as a mess. Igor just shrugged, and it was clear that he didn't care. It happened 3 more times that stuff came in unsorted, but Igor managed to avoid doing it ever. Okay, strike 1/3. 6 weeks later, there was the second incident. Every morning before I started, I would maintain the machine like Antonio had showed me to do, cleaning everything and rubbing special liquid into stone tread the machine's arch ran back and forth on. One morning I came in and turned the machine into manual mode like every morning so that I could run the arch to the end of the thread for maintenance. A second thereafter, I heard a grinding noise and instantly stopped the machine. The arch was an air cushion-based runner, kinda like a hovercraft, as where the bottom of the arch would always remain a tiny bit above the surface to ensure minimum vibration. So a grinding sound is really bad. I quickly inspected the thread and found quite the deep crater in the stone surface, maybe 2 to 3 centimeters deep, 1 inch and wide. That was enough for the air cushion to lose pressure, so the arch was sliding over the stone surface of the thread. This inspection also revealed scratches along nearly the entire length of the tread, so it was pretty clear that the machine had been running with this crater for a good bit. Immediately shut down the machine, informed Vladimir as well as my boss that some big shit was going on here. I also took pictures of the damage with timestamps, just out of my usual paranoia. The machine was put out of commission, as the arch had taken damage. The entire stone tread had to be reworked and the machine needed recalibration. It was out for over a month due to that crater. That crater, Bihiu, looked exactly like the bottom corner of one of the blade, as if one had been dropped onto the stone tread. And the previous shift before me, Igor! Of course he denied that he had done anything wrong, and he could also not recall seeing any scratches or hear any grinding noise during his shift. He tried to blame it on me, but I had reported the stuff like 5 minutes in my shift, with the last blade Igor had measured still in the machine. Again, it was clear to all who had fucked up, but again, not even a harsh word to him. While the machine was getting fixed and reworked, we were put to different work. I got into the pre-assessment team, where the pieces get their first evaluation. I made good friends there which would serve as my ears later on. After the machine got fixed, a good month later, we had collected a massive backlog, to the point that the other departments who did the repair were struggling to find something to do that didn't need measurements. The machine was supposed to work in 3 shifts, but Antonio had left for his 2-year vacation when the machine had been put out for repairs, and the other 2 colleagues, who knew how to run and maintain the machine, had left for better jobs. So it was only me and Igor by then, with me working quite some overtime for good pay. All bullshit aside, hourly wage was really proper. One morning I noticed something pretty weird. The order I had just started the previous afternoon was still not finished, again with just 2 blades remaining. Every measurement report has a timestamp, which I quickly had a look into. The measurement cycle for these was like 3 minutes plus 1 minute exchanging one blade for the next. For some reason, the measurement reports from Igor's shift had like 10 to 15 minutes gapes in between, some even half an hour. Igor was still around, as he had had the night shift. I knew he was a bit of a slacker, but these gapes were quite big, so I first thought there had been trouble with the machine. I asked him if he had had any trouble with the machine last night, and he snapped at me that all had been fine. I asked if he was sure, and he in return inquired why I asked. I told him that there were quite some heavy gaps in between the measurement report, and that I couldn't find any error messages of sudden stops or such. Igor looked at those timestamps for a moment, back at me, and just shrugged before he went home. That would have been the end of it, if it wouldn't had been even stranger the next shift, Monday. I had, for once, not worked on Saturday, so Igor had 3 shifts in since I had last clocked out. I came in as usual, did the maintenance and cleaning, and wanted to check how far he had gotten. 4 orders had went through since my last shift, so I assumed that, as usual, I would have to compile the reports. But there were none. I was pretty confused, searching the orders numbers, checking the machine protocol and all. The measuring machine had been running over the weekend with no shutdown or restart visible in the log, but also no measurement reports at all. I called in Vladimir, as well. 4 orders worth of reports missing is a big deal. According to rules, I also informed my boss that the machine was standstill due to technical issues. Both Vladimir and my boss came into the measuring room and we 3 searched for the problem. It took us a while to figure it out. Simple to it being absolutely not expected, someone had turned off the output of the machine, maybe to avoid the timestamps. This again caused quite some ruckus, as all 4 orders had to be measured again with reports, and production was really struggling now to have something to work on. Again, all clear who had fucked up, and finally Freddy had enough, but not of Igor. The malicious complicants finally XD. The afternoon of the same day, Freddy, the boss of the entire assessment department, came into my measuring room. Nice expensive suit, tie, polished shoes, and went straight into my face. I was currently sitting in my chair, compiling the results of the remeasured first order, when he stood before me, giving me no room to get up. He looked down on me and snapped at me that he was sick and tired of me bullying my coworkers. He handed me a letter, which were the signed papers of my contract's termination, signed by him, of course. He informed me that I had exactly 2 options now. I could either promise to do better, apologize to my coworker Igor, and admit I was at fault, or I would be fired immediately. Well, the good thing of being bullied and terrorized for most of your childhood is you learn to keep a cool head under stress. So I reined in my first urge to discuss with him or to tell him that such was illegal. Instead, I took the letter and read through it before nodding a few times. Due to my cold, professional attitude, I was known for often remaining silent, so he took my nods as my compliments. He informed me that he awaited my written apologies before 2 p.m. All of the bosses went home by 2 p.m. and came in around 8 or 9 XD. Well, when he turned around and marched out with a smug grin, he left me with the termination letter, with his signature on it. Fun fact, when both parties agree to it, a contract can be canceled immediately, without any further responsibilities, beside paying for already issued hours, which go directly through human resources via the electronic timestamps of our clocking. I had 2 hours left until his deadline, and I spent it to carefully clean my workplace, make a backup of my work laptop to the rules, and then, also according to the rules, clean the hard drive completely. The backup was put into the assigned server with all data correctly named and compiled. But of course, the server for backup data is marked as unsearchable, as to avoid your search list getting cluttered. After all, the same parts types came in again and again, with the same material numbers, of course. If you know the rules and knew where to search, You would find the stuff within 20 seconds, if not. Well, good luck, mate. It's only like 10 T-Bys or so. I made a copy of the termination paper, signed by me now too, and send them to my email, which was allowed, put the original back into the envelope, and packed my things up. Then I went up to the office, envelope in hand. The big boss showed his smug smile again the moment he saw me, but was quickly confused when he saw me with my laptop, work phone, and all that. Too, I handed him the letter, offered a polite nod, and turned around again. He shouted where the hell I was going, him still holding the envelope in his hand. You terminated my contract according to the rules. I am to hand over all personal equipment I had been handed by the company before leaving. Exception Act to Paragraph B are safety shoes and safety glasses. I bid you a fine day, Mr. Freddy. I said that with a cold, calculated voice, trying my best to sound like a lawyer. Simple, because I knew he hated my professional attitude. Then I went to my own boss and piled my stuff on his desk. My boss was confused as hell, asking me what was up. I briefly informed him that my contract was terminated and that once more quoted the rule. My boss was a smug ass too, but he wasn't all dumb. His eyes went big as he immediately realized that I was the only person he had left that actually knew how to maintain and properly operate the measuring machine, and that he had such a backlog already that other departments, relying on the measurements, had started to enforce short-time work. He was first lost for words and then rushed into Freddy's office to see that termination letter. Meanwhile, I changed my clothes in the locker room, went to the gate, and asked the security guards to please have a full inspection of my person and my backpack. This was likewise regulation for personnel that was terminated on short notice, and while the security guards were pretty baffled that I asked to be searched, they complied. They searched me fully and handed me a written confirmation that I had nothing on me that belonged to the company. My now ex-boss tried to call me all the time on my way home, but I dislike having phone calls in public transport, so I simply muted them and continued reading my book until I got home. There, 4 p.m. by now, so well past his own time to go home XD, I finally answered his call. He tried to convince me that I needed this job and that all this could be sorted. My reply, I will have a new job within a week. You will need to take at least a month to train someone new on the machine. If you had anyone that train a new person, I tell you what, give me a solid contract with triple the pay and I come back. Oh, and I want a written apologize from Freddy too, as well as my piece when working. He told me that I was completely unreasonable with such demands, again me. So to get this clear, 3 times I discover massive bullshit happening. 3 times you guys try to heap the blame on me, and then you guys literally try to humiliate me, and Freddy Dutch fire me. And you want me to be reasonable? Well, guess it would be reasonable then to just ignore you then. Please be well. I hung up then and blocked his number, as well as any other number with which he would try to call me later on. The aftermath. As I had mentioned before, I still had ears in the company, so I have a good idea what followed. The facility suddenly had its most sensitive bottleneck tightened even further, and then clogged full of concrete soon after. No one maintained or cleaned the measuring machine anymore, and being a precision machine, it didn't took that lightly. Vladimir was soon called in multiple times a day to fix a problem, which in return built up a backlog for him in other places. Things I, or previously Antonio, had fixed within a minute now took hours, just for Vladimir to find time to come over and fix it, in a minute XD. He tried explaining stuff to Igor, but yeah, didn't work well. Other departments ran completely dry of work, and of course they didn't want to bear the blame for missed deadlines, so the whole issue was pretty quickly reported up the ladder, and with no one wanting to take the hit, it climbed higher and higher, before it was eventually got onto the desk of the national CEO of the company, the highest entity of the company this side of the Great Pond. Found that out via a friend in HR. Followed was the arrival of the proverbial kill squad, the modern equivalent to an executor. A bunch of guys in very tight suits, no sense of humor, cold eyes, and the strict command to find someone's head to put on a silver plate. As far as I heard, even a prosecutor from the USA was among them. I was called by the company a month later, asking if I could come in for an interview. Not a job interview, mind you, but they asked me to give my statement on the whole affair. This wasn't a legal thing, and they had no way to force me to make a statement, as it was an internal investigation, but I still happily complied and even gave my signature that I told the truth. Gave them the entire story, as accurate as I could, and openly admitted what I didn't know or where I was only guessing. They thanked me and apologized, honesty I felt, that they could not pay me for the time they took from me due to legal reasons. I was all fine with that and went home. Igor got fired for careless negligence. His brother Boris likewise got the immediate boot in the ass. My boss went down under as well. He and Boris were fired for mismanagement. Their boss, however, Freddie, he got not only fired, but dragged in front of court. No idea how that went on, as he was dragged to the U.S. But given how ridiculous that justice system is, and that he had been designated as a scapegoat by one of the biggest companies worldwide, wouldn't be surprised if he had to hold very tightly on the soap for a good while. The entire facility went firmly in the reds for that year, due to nearly all contracted reworks missing deadlines, which means a daily fees of 10 of thousands per contract. My ears in the company soon sought themselves new jobs, despite, in one case, being there for 20 years. Last I heard is that the company had to contract the producer of the measurement machine to train new employee how to operate it properly. I had asked for triple my pay, while those guys were more like triple the zeros at the end. Oh, and I did find a new job within one day. I was fired on Monday, had the interview on Tuesday, a test work day the Thursday. I was asked at the end of that day when I could start, which was the next Monday. I do manual measurements now in an incoming quality control department. The boss is a blast, the team is all friendly, and my commute is 18 minutes with an electric scooter. I work there for 9 months now, and I already am the de facto team leader for first sample stuff. And best of all, I am appreciated for the work I do too. Hope you like this long story. Hey everyone. Wow, what an intense story, right? Strap in because this one's got layers. So we've got this guy working at a big American energy company in Europe. He's in quality control, operating a crucial 3D measuring machine that plays a big role in reworking parts of gas turbines. First of all, I gotta say the dynamic at this workplace is pretty wild. You've got Antonio, the seasoned veteran, who's grooming our protagonist to take over his role. Antonio's got tons of built-up leave, which he uses to go on an early retirement. On the flip side, there's Igor, who's basically cruising through the job because of his connections. And the cliques? It's like high school all over again. When Igor's negligence starts causing major issues, our guy steps up to point them out. But instead of being praised, he's actually getting blamed for them. It's crazy to think about how dysfunctional the management was. What's interesting here is how the protagonist stayed professional and cold, despite all the heat he was getting. Talk about keeping your cool under pressure. Eventually his boss, Freddie, fires him, thinking he's got the upper hand. But our dude uses that signed termination letter as his golden ticket out and leaves them in a bigger mess. That's some next-level malicious compliance. The best part? He gets a new job within a day and lands in a much better place, with a great team and a short commute. So what do you guys think about this story? Ever been in a situation where you had to just walk away from a toxic job? Drop your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your experiences. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more reactions like this. Story 3. Mock the disabled. Justice is served many years later. This is a story about a piece of shit receiving their deserved karma several years later. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It's sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that make you despise their existence. And there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these unforgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers and understanding that some people shouldn't be allowed outside, which being a shy person who hates conflict wasn't the best, But at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly lady who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I had last seen her, but one morning, I see her car park into the disabled parking bay as she already has a blue badge, only this time she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I didn't have chance to talk to her yet when a works truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her, and out jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this, and must have absolutely massive balls of steel, and stood up to this ignorant builder and politely informed them that they shouldn't be parking there, as it's for the disabled, and he doesn't have a badge. What happened next, I can't forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability, and claim the cast on her leg was a fake, and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible, then walks off putting on an overdramatic fake limp, laughing away with their teenage kid, whilst the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it, and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they didn't care or want to get involved. For years, I worked in this store, always seeing this scum builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often, and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled bays, and even got to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store, and this scum was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute cunt. Yet this year I was blessed with good fortune, and our store was outfitted with some absolute joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations, but instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine, and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally, and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It didn't take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly didn't take long for the opportunity to get revenge. And so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules, there is a lovely £80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule, no parking in disabled without a badge. And I know well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it wasn't long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine, and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay, with no badge. I smashed them car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled, and as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learnt their lesson as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum, and they would find their new parking space inside child parking. Rule 2. Don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course. Not they haven't learnt their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we didn't have many spaces for. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car, violating the child parking, and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their cat seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they start receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught. But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learnt their lesson? Would you be surprised if they had not, as it didn't take me long to find them. Rule 3. You must park inside a marked bay. And what a surprise, the scum still manages to fuck this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside taxi parking but can't fit the big-ass car in it? Boom, that ain't inside a marked bay, and ka-ching, another ticket and fine for the... Have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That's right, scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun, until eventually, scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules, and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars, so my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now I know what people are probably going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah, but I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way, my time or money isn't wasted. Secondly, it did have an effect, as they repeatable changed their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a fuck ton of the time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separate and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines, building up overtime for being scum. Cherry on the top, about 3 years later, I walk by this piece of scum on the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket, accusing them for being the one giving them all parking fines. Which put me at peace, knowing this must have seriously got to them and cost them to still be raving mad after 3 years. Short version, I give someone many small parking fines, adding up to the thousands of pounds for insulting a disabled lady several years earlier. Wow, what a story. This definitely had me hooked from the beginning. So let's break it down. The narrator starts off working in retail, something a lot of us can relate to, right? Retail is tough enough, and dealing with rude customers just makes it worse. Any of you guys work in retail before? Let me know in the comments. Now, the old lady with the crutches, she sounds like a real trooper, standing up to that horrible builder. Can we just take a moment to appreciate her courage? She's the real star here. It's just awful how the builder humiliated her. Seriously, what kind of person does that? Fast forward 7 years and karma finally comes around. The store gets these high-tech ticketing machines, and our narrator finds the perfect way to extract some long-awaited revenge. Pretty clever, right? They start ticketing the builder every time he parks in the disabled spaces and later the child parking spaces. This guy just doesn't learn. It's almost poetic how the builder constantly gets fined and then spends years trying to fight these tickets. And the best part? He's still mad about it years later, screaming at someone else. Talk about karma catching up. What's your favorite part of this story? Do you think the fines were a fitting revenge? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them.